Hey guys, my name is Dan and this is Stout Gaming. I am joined again by my front office Ryan, and we're just going to be doing a quick mid-season recap of the VBA Season 2. How are you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing really good. Things are going really well for you this season. I feel like I've barely been a front office. Uh, usually when I'm a front office, I'll do some practice games or I'll recommend things and prep and play. This season for you, it's just been you send me a rough draft of the team, and then I say like, oh no, maybe one thing, and then you tell me yes or no, and then you just play the game, and that's been my job.
Yeah, I'd say things have been working out pretty well so far. I'm very happy.
Yeah.
For those of you who aren't following the VBA super closely, my team is currently 5-0 at the halfway point, 10-0 in games, and with a total differential of plus 24. But that's enough about me for now. Let's just go ahead and get started in this recap. We're going to keep this one much shorter than our sort of preseason breakdown. But we're going to start by looking at transactions that have happened so far. So we've got a couple pages of transactions. The way that this is laid out is I have it done by team in order that they were done within the team, not obviously overall order because a lot happened the same week. And the first Pokemon is the one that was dropped, and the second one is the one that they picked up for that. So looking at this first page of transactions, let's go ahead and start with the Clint and Clefables. What are your thoughts on their transactions so far, Ryan?
Generally good. I like that dropping the Mandibuzz so that you have the points to grab Claydol for Salamence, I think was a really good trade. I do think Porygon's okay, so Porygon Z for Blaziken is one of those things where the wrong Mon was traded, I think. You should have dropped the Cresselia for Blaziken. I think Blaziken's really good on this comp, but now it's a very physically oriented comp. And Porygon Z was not actually an issue on the original comp. It was actually one of the things I liked about it. It just needed the comp needed more things to pair with that Clefable. So in my mind, this team would have been like insane had it done the Mandibuzz for Haunter, grabbed that Mence, and then instead of dropping Porygon Z for Blaziken, grabbed Cresselia. That would be unbelievable. Like that would be, I think, that would turn this into one of the strongest teams in the league. As it stands, I think it's a pretty overall solid transaction period, but I do think that was a bit of a misstep on the Porygon Z Blaziken because Porygon Z still had a lot to offer this comp, and I think missing it actually does hurt.
I can agree with that. In prep for the Clefables, because we played already this season, prepping for Blaziken and Salamence next to Clefable were both different things that I had to attack, but I didn't really have to prep for Cresselia next to Clefable as much. So that makes sense, that I think the Porygon Z would have added just an extra thing that would have made this team even harder to prep for. But I do think adding Blaziken was the correct move, even if I think Cresselia would have been a better drop than the PZ.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but I think overall the team definitely improved from the totality of the transactions, like immensely improved because
Oh
it
yeah,
has multiple
no,
threats now, and there's a lot of stuff to prep for as opposed to
yeah,
just needing
it's a
to
lot
beat
more
PZ.
multifaceted. Yeah,
All right,
no, I wholeheartedly agree. It's definitely a big improvement, so I'll definitely give like major props to that. And I think it was some good weakness identification in the comp.
yeah, I can agree with that. But moving on to the Rock'em Sock'ems, they dropped Marowak for Pelipper, Virizion for Tapu Bulu, and Palisand for Beartick. I'm personally very split on a lot of these. I think in our preseason power rankings, we talked about dropping Marowak or Palossand because they didn't need both of them, but both ended up being dropped, and now they don't have that ground type. The Virizion
Yeah,
for the Bulu, I could see either way. They did have a strong beat up mode with it, but it wasn't getting activated much this season, and Bulu does give grassy terrain. But the Pelipper and Beartick, I think, is a really odd rain mode selection. Because Beartick isn't necessarily the best rain sweeper, even though it has Swift Swim, because if you max it, its stab move changes the weather. But what are your thoughts on the Rock'em Sock'ems transactions?
yeah, I agree. I think so. Virizion for Bulu, I generally think is pretty good on this comp. I do miss the beat up mode a little bit, but it was hard to activate, and I think people were prepping around it pretty well. So I think Bulu overall is a really nice kind of middle ground. You keep a grass type, a really powerful offensive grass type without losing a whole lot. And I think Bulu is a little bit more flexible on this comp. But the thing is, a lot of teams in this league have massive ground weaknesses, and you dropped two major ground type attackers for, I think, kind of a subpar rain mode. I tend to agree with you. Like, if this was like, let's say instead of Bulu, it was like Pelipper, Ludicolo, and then one of the ground types was capped, I'd be like, yeah, okay, that's cool. But the way that this was done is, I think, a little suspicious. If I were in this situation, I very likely would have kept the Marowak and dropped the Palossand for like a Trick Room setter. I think would have been the better route to go. I'm kind of split on this too. I'm not really sold on this rain mode being all too threatening. And Beartick is really frail and misses a lot of calcs. I've used Dynamax Beartick before, and it's never impressed me very much.
But I also think that I might be partially to blame for this, because when I used Goodra against them in our matchup, I know that they really struggled for answers with the Goodra, and the Bulu and Beartick pickups came after that. So I can understand a little bit of trying to not have as much of an obvious bulky dragon weakness, but I'm not sure if this was the best way to attack it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay, then we can look at the Corpus Christi Crabbies. They dropped Hippowdon for Rotom Frost, Gmax Duraludon for Gmax Inteleon, and Dracovish for Naganadel. I very much miss the sand mode on this team. Like, I think that gave the team a lot of extra depth, and I probably would have kept the sand mode, and that's my big takeaway here. But what are your thoughts?
I would have kept the sand mode. I think I actually rated the Krabbies much higher on my initial PRs than you did, I believe. I think that was our biggest discrepancy, because I really liked their sand mode with the Dracovish and also having the Tailwind Whim mode. It made the Dracovish like just super hard to prep for, and gave that team a lot of depth that I think is now missing. I think Gmax Duraludon for Inteleon is fine, especially because I don't think you needed the dual dragon typing, really. I think that's good. I'm not really sure what Rotom Frost is offering this team, and Naganadel's a solid Dynamax threat, solid dragon type. Problem is, this team is already kind of weak to ground, and still is. Gmax Inteleon doesn't like Max Quakes because they boost Spadef anyway. And Rotom Frost, yeah, it's Rotom Frost. I feel like Hippowdon was generally the better Pokemon between the two. And losing that Dracovish mode, I think, actually kind of hurts this team. I do think that the comp is still solid overall, but I actually don't think these transactions help this team overall. I think the Inteleon was the only one that I can wholeheartedly endorse. And even then, Duraludon's really good. So,
yeah, I can generally agree with that. I think this is more of a lateral move for the Krabbies, but they do lose one of their potential modes with that sand mode that would have been very threatening to prep for any matchup that we might have had. But moving on to the Fuchsia City Royals, so their draft was selected by their Twitch chat, but I believe they had full control over these three transactions, and they were drop Executor A for Aromatisse, drop Aegislash for Ribombee, gain extra points, drop War Turtle, use the extra points, and pick up Guzzlord. What are your thoughts here, Ryan?
Okay, so this is the first one that I unconditionally think every transaction was an improvement. Aromatisse was a very, very solid replacement for the Executor. It's one of the best Trick Room setters available. Really strong option there. And so now you have the problem of, you got the Fairy so then you have Aegislash, which I predicted would underperform, and guess what? I was right. Aegislash underperformed. You grab Ribombee. It has kind of a weird niche, but Ribombee is actually a pretty good utility offensive mon, and a potential setup sweeper. I think it's pretty good. And then War Turtle for Guzzlord is a no-nonsense, great transaction. Guzzlord was a little low-ranked, I think, in this league. It's very powerful. They have a lot of options with it. It's good next to the Aromatisse. I actually think these were unconditionally really excellent transactions.
I agree. And I play the Royals next week, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. But Rabombi speed swapping onto the Guzzlord is something I want to see at least once this season. Not against me, probably, but I do want to see it at least once. So I do think these were all really good moves for their comp.
Yeah.
Next up, we got the Dice Roll Drillburs, who have made 2 transactions so far, so they still have 1 available. They dropped Berserker for Driftblim and Darmanitan for Tangrowth. I think these are both really solid transactions for their team. What are your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I like these a lot too. The Tangrowth in particular was a very, very, very smart pickup. I like the Driftblim, especially because you have the Perch and Electric Terrain, so you can get Fast Tailwind off with that. I didn't see he doesn't have like an Ice Shard proc for it or anything like that, so but maybe he'll grab one at some point, and I generally like that. I think you got a lot of utility from the Driftblim and the Tangrowth that the team was missing. They both address the massive ground weakness that comp had. I think this was a very, very smart choice.
I agree, and I do know the coach Sam was going to dice roll some transactions, but elected against it. And I believe that these were good ones. That if he dice rolled them, I would have been calling BS on it. But saying that he made these, they very much help his team.
Yeah, no, they're very, very strong transactions, and I think bump the Drillbers on like my own PR quite a bit as well.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Moving on, we've got Raz and the Detroit Delmise, who just made their first transaction this week, dropping Ninetales for Darmanitan. I think he's going to have to do something about the Venusaur on his comp moving forward without the Ninetales, but so I don't think this is a complete look at what he will be doing with these transactions. But what do you think about this first one?
Yeah, my first impression is I don't love it, mostly just because Venu Ninetales is so strong.
Right.
Um, it's such a powerful mode. I mean, Sun Venusaur, even though you have the Gmax form and he just has the regular form, it doesn't matter. Like Venusaur is so powerful, in Sun, and I do think losing that mode, like the next transaction has to be really good for me to be sold that that was the correct play for the team. I think.
I can agree with that.
Like I have to be sold pretty hard on the next thing. Darm is generally a pretty good mon. I don't really have any issue with Darmanitan. I think it's great. It's got good coverage, good move pool, good speed, fantastic attack. So like that's fine. I'm just
It just doesn't
a
have
little
draft.
suspicious of yeah, I'm just a little suspicious of not having drop.
And while prepping for him, because he still had the Ninetales this past week when I played him, the Ninetales with specs was something that I was actually really worried about, and now I won't have to worry about that in the future.
Yeah.
Looking at the Lost Teddiursas, they dropped Alakazam for Gothitelle, Hydreigon for Meowstic M, and Wobbuffet for Decidueye. They both added and subtracted from a potential Perish Trap mode. But what do you think about these transactions overall?
I think they're generally pretty solid. Don't they have two ghost types now though?
Yes, they've got both
With
Gengar and Decidueye.
okay. Um, yeah, I generally like these. I do think they're an improvement over the original comp. Uh, Alakazam wasn't doing anything, so I think Gothitel's a much better option there. Decidueye is actually a really good Pokemon in general. Hydreigon's one of those. Hydreigon for Meowstic took me a bit because at this point I'm looking at the team and there's a lot of Psychic and there's a lot of Ghost types, but they actually cover each other pretty well. So I don't think the type weakness is as big a deal. And Meowstic is kind of a really nice utility player to the other things on the comp. So I think that's totally fine. That said, some other coaches should be looking to pick up Hydreigon. It's literally one of the best offensive mons available in draft. It has insane coverage. Yeah, it has 4 times weakness, but its coverage, move pool, ability with levitate. I mean, it's just bonkers how good Hydreigon can be. It straight up won our MDL season, like last season, off the by itself, basically. It's a very, very potent mon. So I would recommend that other coaches look at it, but I actually do think for the specific comp, dropping the Hadouken was a pretty good choice,
Yeah,
potentially.
I can definitely agree with that. I think added to both the power and utility of his team with the overall transactions, and I do think this was a very positive step for the Lost Teddiurstas. I think they got stronger because of it.
Yeah, I think it was a very much a net positive.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So looking at the Greedy Greninjas, they dropped Araquanid for Oranguru, Regirock for Marowak A, and then Oranguru for Gastrodon. So they basically dropped Araquanid and Regirock for Gastrodon and Marowak A with an extra transaction in there, so they are out of transactions now. I really like the Marowak A on this team. I think that move was a really good one. I'm less sold on the Araquanid and Gastrodon switch. Like, I understand Marowak is now your most powerful Trick Room attacker, but I do think Araquanid was doing a lot of work on this team as well. But I can also understand wanting that Storm Drain utility, especially potentially next to the Marowak. So I'm very split on these transactions. Like, I could see them being very good. I think the Marowak one is an improvement, but I could see the water move being good, but I could also see it being a bit more of a negative. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I generally speaking like it, though. I think it's overall a net positive. I think Alolan Marowak is just such a monster. I mean, there's nothing that hits quite like it does. Gastrodon is a pretty solid mon, and you get rid of the Araquanid, so you pick up a water type and a ground type, and I just talked about how I like ground types in this draft a lot because a lot of teams are weak to them. I think it's overall pretty solid. My only real issue is that your TR setter is the Musharna, which is weak to dark, and so is the Marowak. So I think the Trick Room mode is actually kind of knockoff weak of all things. A little weird to say, but it's true because the Snorlax will likely have a berry, so you can knock it off. If you knock off the Bone Meringue, Marowak's damage gets turned to nothing. And then Musharna is super weak. So like Max Darkness and knockoff combo seems really good against the Trick Room mode now, and it wasn't that good before. Or it wasn't particularly insane because you have Araquanid with bug moves kind of threatening that. So I think it's overall pretty much a net positive. I am a little suspicious of that Trick Room mode as it maybe should be.
Yeah, I can make agreements with that. I do still think they've got a very strong team, and I do think that they're generally improved, although the Araquanid Gastrodon, probably a slight improvement looking at the rest of the team, but still very, very close to a push, and it did take 2 transactions to get to, so we'll see how that turns out, but I do think they improved overall with their 3 transactions. We gotta look at the Sandston Scissors, who dropped Corsola G for Cradilly, Rotom Frost for Centiskorch, and Raikou for Cinderace. What are your thoughts on these?
I generally like all these. So the Corsola for the Cradilly makes a lot of sense to me. Cradilly's a really good mon. It's got that Storm Drain ability, and it's got its own kind of move pool that it can work with. I think it's just generally better than Corsola G is. Corsola G is just a stall mon. It doesn't do anything for his comp. The Rotom Frost for the Centiskorch gives them a little bit more of a traditional type core. You got a grass and fire type there. And then Raikou for Cinderace. I'm shocked Cinderace was available. Cinderace, yeah, you have double fire type, but Cinderace is barely a fire type anyway. And my biggest issue with the Scizor's comp was that the type cores were missing, and that I thought the offensive presence was really lacking, and this fixes all of those issues I had with the comp. So I'm pretty happy with what the Scizors did. I think these were very, very smart transactions.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Watching the Scissors play this year, they've almost run mono support a lot of the time. Even with the Thundurus usually running the support sets instead of the offensive sets. So I do think the Cinderace will be a welcome addition to this team to provide a bit more damage pressure so they can continue to try and RNG para-hacks their way through this season, which they have done a very good job of doing so far. So moving on to the next page, we've got the Island Dragons, who dropped Dragonite for Melodic. Good move. They had too many dragon types, too many quad ice weaknesses. I don't really think there's much else to say here.
Yeah, good trade. Nice job.
Yeah, solid.
That's about it.
The Orchestra Stunfisks dropped Tapu Bulu for Celesteela and Slurpuff for Appleton. I know you really like Celesteela, so why don't you tell me a bit about these
Yeah.
transactions?
I really like these. Bulu's kind of a mixed bag of a mon from what I've seen. It can be really good. It can also be really bad. Steela is always good. Steela is one of my favorite draft mons, period. It can be physical or special. It's the typing's insane. It's great for weakness policy stuff. That's great. And Appleton's actually kind of a slept on mon, I think. Did the Stunfisks have? I'm trying to remember their team. Do they have terrain of any kind?
It was Bulu. I don't believe so. I think after they dropped Bulu, they don't really have the terrain
They
anymore.
lost it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Appleton makes a lot of sense there. You got a grass type. You keep the grass typing, which is good. And you got that dragon typing. It's got thick fat too, so it can eat some stuff. Apple acid's nice for this comp. Yeah. No, I think that's a very solid 2 trades. No complaints. Very nice job.
Yeah, I'm sad that we don't get to see a weakness policy on Bird and Slurpuff at any point, but I do think that with the Celesteela trade, the Appleton trade makes a lot of sense. So I do think that both of these were steps in a very positive direction for the Stunfisks.
Right.
Next, we got the Great Lake Grimmsnarls, who dropped Kling for Glaceon because Kling doesn't get Trick Room, and they learned that after they drafted Kling. I don't really think there's anything else to say here.
Yeah, Glaceon's good. That's fine.
Yes, and then last we've got the other undefeated team, the Gardner Guzzlords, who dropped Duosion for Bronzor and Drampa for Sliggoo, and they've picked up some points to potentially use on a last transaction. But what are your thoughts on these transactions?
I don't like them very much, if that's okay. They're okay. So the problem is that Bronzor for Duosion's fine. I think you can go either way on those Eviolite Trick Room setters. They're kind of identical. Duosion's more consistent though between the two. Drampa for Sliggoo, unless there has to be kind of a really nice transaction coming up for me to like that. Because now you have problems with who gets the Eviolite, and Drampa's insane. In Trick Room, Drampa is one of the most threatening mons in the entire game. It has insanely strong max strikes, max Wormwinds. It has insane coverage too. It gets like max electric, max flare, Drampa's a really, really, really good Pokemon in doubles draft. It really excels in its role, and is frequently, I think, a little undervalued or underplaced.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever points you've earned from these two has to make it worth it for whatever that top mon is for me to be sold. Because otherwise I think you just dropped potentially one of the best Trick Room sweepers that you had available to you.
I can agree with that. In prepping for our MDL season, I'm working with the guy who has Drampa on his team, just generally comp ideas, and I was running some basic Drampa calcs, and the thing is insane. So
It's ridiculous.
I don't like the drop that much because I do think Drampa is very solid, but I will withhold judgment until I see what that third transaction is with the points that they saved.
Yeah.
And then we've had
absolutely
3 teams that did not do any transactions. Me, the Alexandria Arcanines, the Pittsburgh Steel type, and the Melton Nuts. What are your thoughts on these teams who have not made any changes?
You not making any changes makes sense. You're undefeated. There's no real reason to make transactions at this point. I think if you do any, it'll be near the end of the season, just so that way your team is a little less predictable going into playoffs, maybe. But even still, your team's quite unpredictable and really hard to beat. So I don't think you might not even need a transaction this season. Pittsburgh Steel types, their record's a little bit more shaky than yours is, but I actually really like their comp a lot. And I don't 100% think it needs any major changes. Maybe there maybe is like 1 or 2 things they could do, but I think no transactions is fine to see. The Meltan Nuts needs to make some transactions. I think kind of big time. We haven't talked about records yet, but the Meltan Nuts are currently like 0-5, I think. Which to me is a little crazy almost. Because I mean, you're talking about a comp with Moltres Galar and Metagross, which are 2 of the best mons in the entire format. And I think the issue, and even Gmax Lapras, which is another awesome mon, I think the problem is that they didn't support those mons very well, and they're not actually supporting them well in game. And one of the ways to fix that is transactions. I think the issue with the comp is that Right now, you have no way to do a brutal swing on the Metagross to activate Weakness Policy, or like a fast bulldoze, like a bulldoze off of Raikou or Entei or something, where you can just click bulldoze and everything else's speed gets lowered by one stage. Metagross is faster than everything. Weakness Policy activates and kill the whole team. Or and you have an Ice Shard proc for Moltres and a Volt Switch proc, but I don't see them used almost ever. It's like the Lapras can proc it, can proc Weakness Policy on the Moltres, and the Volt Switch on the Raichu. I saw that one week. But to me, it's like you have all these really like good tools that aren't being utilized, and you're lacking some tools that would make your team even more threatening. So I think transactions are the key to the Meltan season bouncing back, because as it stands, I don't think their current team is just able to hold up to the pressure the other coaches' teams are applying.
I can agree with those assessments generally, but you were just talking about records, so let's take a look at what the standings are currently, updated for everyone that has played through Week 5, but most of these are just through Week 4. You see a lot of numbers on screen. I'm just going to talk through what these numbers mean so anyone who's watching this video can understand it before we start getting into it. I will look at the Gardner Guzzlords, who are currently in second place, and I will use them as the breakdown. So the first two numbers in parentheses before the team are my preseason power rankings and then your preseason power rankings on a 1 to 15 scale because we didn't rank my team. And then in the slash line, the first decimal number is the record of their opponents that they have played so far. So the Guzzlords' opponents have had a combined 20% win rate so far this season, which has been the easiest schedule in the league, which is that /16, meaning they've had the 16th most difficult schedule so far. But their remaining opponents have had a combined 60% win rate, which is the third hardest schedule in the league afterwards, which is the /600 and then the /3. Then we've got the records next to that, and then the total game differential. So they are 4-0,
Right.
and they've won 6 more games than they've lost. So does anything really stand out to you just looking over at the standings with our slash lines at?
Yeah, right. So far, just if we're talking about just these top three, you've had a very dominant season, which I don't really want to sugarcoat that. I think you're like, I'm aware I'm your front office and I don't want you to brag on yourself, so I get to brag on you for a bit. You've had a very dominant season. You've picked up consistent wins, and things have gone extremely well for you. You've played a lot of tougher teams and done extremely well against them. And frankly, I think you've been very creative with your comp. Doing things like the Halfeeble next to the Coco is really creative. The Electric Seed Gudra was a tech we were kind of holding on to that has really popped off and is something that's I think is unexpected. Your Trick Room mode has been consistently solid this season. I think you've really just demonstrated some really stellar prep play and drafting ability for this season. So I do want to compliment you on that. I think 5-0 was extremely impressive in of itself. And to the other undefeated team, the Gardner Guzzlords, I'd also like to pay compliments. It's hard to be undefeated at the midpoint of the season. Good job to them. I do think their last half of the season is going to be very tough, though. They're going to have to work hard to stay undefeated. And I think the Scissors are actually in almost a better spot because they've already had most of their really challenging games on their schedule, just based on where we're at now. And they've really impressed me. I was not super high on the Scissors comp at the start of the season, but that mono support really worked out well for them, and they've had, I think, some of the strongest transactions overall. So I actually expect the rest of their season to get even smoother than it did at the start. So I'm really looking forward to how they play out the rest of their season.
Yeah, absolutely. The Guzzlords, I think, did draw a very favorable early season schedule, and I'm just looking at their schedule for the next, let's just say the next 4 weeks, including week 5, which they haven't played yet. They have the Rock'em Sock'ems, who are 3-1, the Stunfisks, who are a very solid 2-2, then me, and then the Greninjas, who are 3-1. So they've got sort of a murderer's row coming up over the next couple weeks, which, if they're able to survive that and be undefeated, that will be even more impressive than what they've done so far. And for the Scissors, they have the easiest schedule in the league in terms of opponents' win percentage left, and that's not really close. It's by more than 10%. Like the 0.296 is the next to lowest one is 0.409. So they've got the easiest schedule left. So I think they are in a very solid position. I'd come very close to calling them a lock for playoffs if they're able to continue playing the way they've been playing so far.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I also think, I mean, generally the teams on this part have done a really nice job. I was quite fond of both the Greninjas and the Grimmsnarls teams. I'm glad to see them 3-1. And I think, generally speaking, this half of the draft, outside of the Scissors and the Guzzlords, who have been very surprising, if you look at our PRs, a lot of that actually does at the very least, they're into the top half of our PRs by and large, and they are not underperforming for us, really.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And then I know the Pittsburgh Steel types are
really outdoing our expectations.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Pittsburgh Steel types I know are at 2-2 currently, but one of their losses came because of a DC, which is unfortunate. So they're also right in line with about where we expected them going into the season.
Right.
And then looking at the back half, I do think there are some teams that are primed to potentially make a run at playoffs that have had a really difficult start to the season, and their schedule sort of eases up. The Detroit Delmi stick out to me as one that we really liked them. We really liked them in the preseason in our power rankings, and they've had a very difficult start to the season. They've played both undefeated teams already, but then they have their schedule really eases up at the end. The Clinton Clefables they made really good transactions, I think, on the whole, and they've had a really interesting season because they played the Detroit Delmis, but then they've also played the two undefeated teams and then two teams that don't have a win yet. So the Clefables could be really good, they could be really bad, and it's really hard to tell right now because they've lost to the teams they should lose to, and they've beaten the teams they should beat so far. And there hasn't been a lot of close matches with them, except for week 1 before their transactions happened, when their team was considerably worse than it is now.
Right.
Does anything else stand out to you on this back half?
Not a ton. I do think the Delmis has definitely had a tough schedule. I think they'll bounce back. The Teddy Ursa seem to be looking like they might be in for a slightly rougher time, along with the Stunfisks, but I do actually have a lot of faith in those two squads pulling it out for the rest of the season. And I'm very confident that the Clefables and the Delmises are going to rise up quite a bit. I'm not 100% sure on how many of this back half are going to beat out the teams that are like the Steel types, the Drillburs, and the Grimmsnarls for playoffs. I'm not 100% sure on how well they're going to do in trying to like kind of take over where those teams are at. Because a lot of those teams have schedules that are about as easy as they were at the start. So even some of theirs do get harder. So I am a little cautious to say how many of that top 8 will actually move out of that current top 8. I'm just not sure on the number. I do expect 1 or 2, but I'm not sure how big of an upset we'll see there.
Yeah, the Greedy Greninjas and the Island Dragons both have really difficult back halves.
They really do.
680 in the back is a huge obstacle to face. I do think the Melton Nuts, we were talking about how they've struggled despite their comp, and I think part of it is look at the win percentage of their first 5 opponents. That is again 10 points higher than the second place team in terms of difficulty. I don't know how you can find a combination of teams randomly that have a 73 win percentage, like a 73% win percentage.
No, you really can't. And I actually do think I think the Meltan Nuts even though they're in last right now, they are a team that I would not be shocked to see pick up a ton of wins and be a wild card playoff contender. Like, it could definitely happen, and I wouldn't be shocked to see it. But they're gonna have to bring their A game, and I think that I'm someone who generally likes transactions. In our own leagues that we do, I encourage them because I think that as you play with a team and find the holes with a team, that you will get a sense for what you're maybe missing, and you can start to figure out what can fill those niches. So I generally am very pro transaction, and I really do think the Mel 10 Nuts need to consider some to get out of this rut, because I think if they do, they probably will. More so than some of the other teams at the bottom. The Island Dragons and the Royals have kind of done what they've done. I do think they can get out of this hole, but I think the Meltans are the ones that I think, with the proper tools, could make it out the easiest, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And they do have all three transactions available, while the Royals used all three, even though we believe all three did improve their team. So I could see that, because their schedule obviously eases up from like a statistically almost impossibility of the first 5 weeks to a much more manageable schedule in the back half.
Right.
But those were sort of my big takeaways from this. I do think the Greedy Greninjas are going to be a team to keep an eye on, because I had them as my number 2 team in the power rankings. You had them as your number 3 team, and they are 3-1 right now. And I believe they are the team that beat the Scissors so far this season. So they are a very impressive 3-1, but they've got that murderer's row in the back half that we've got to keep an eye on.
Right.
But other than that, I'm having a lot of fun this season. Do you have any closing thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, no, it's been kind of fun to watch as an observer. I know I don't type much in chat or anything, but I actually do typically try to catch a replay or two when I have the time, and I try to, at least pay attention to, score reporting and things like that. Same thing I said last time, my DMs are open. If you want to talk to me about anything that I said in here, it's totally fine. Piano Guy 27 in the Discord. And it's been fun to kind of go over this with you. It's been fun to help you out this season. And here's to the ending of it. I'm hoping you can maybe even pull an undefeated season. That would be pretty wild. But we'll see.
I'm going to do my best too. My competitive nature will drive me to try to do that, unlike in the MDL, where after I locked up playoffs, I decided to start memeing. I might actually try to go for...
Me too.
I might try to go for the undefeated season, but
I mean,
do have
you're
some tough matchups.
looking at it, so you have some tough matches, but you are looking at a potential undefeated, which I think, at that point in the MDL, we both had like a loss or two, and we were like, yeah, whatever. And we just kind of started doing whatever. So yeah, best of luck to all the coaches. And I'm excited to see the rest of their seasons.
Absolutely. Why don't you guys let us know what you've thought in the comments below, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. For Ryan, my name has been Dan, and this was Stout Gaming. Thank you guys for coming. Bye.